So, Frank, you've done a lot of unusual projects over the years, very creative, a wide range of styles and approaches to music, but this is really something different. How did you get the concept to do this?
Well, this is different from the other things I've done. I basically took a break for a couple of years that I didn't compose, as I was kind of feeling that I was in a bit of a creative rut. Not that it was bad, but I just felt I was repeating a lot of the same musical ideas. One day I was listening to some drum solo. I think it was a Jack DeJohnette thing with Keith Jarrett on YouTube, and I was like, yeah, this drum solo, wow, it'd be really interesting to take a drum solo, an improvised drum solo, and then just orchestrate and compose music around it. So I'd been playing with Brock with doing some kind of free jazz trio stuff with bass player Tom Lockett, and so I asked Brock if he'd be interested in trying this out, and he said sure. And he came over. He did 3 pieces. I did a little drum suite based on those. What he played just opened up rhythm and for me, melody and everything in music. And I just was writing what I'd call stream of consciousness music. And after he did that, what was kind of great was, I wrote the music, and that took a couple of months to get those pieces done. When he heard them, he goes, I know, I see what you're doing now. Let me come over and do some more. And so he came over and did a bunch more. And on some of those, I actually gave him some ideas of visual titles and things like that I just said, pretend like this is King Kong and Godzilla tearing it up in Manhattan. So you just do this very aggressive drum solo. And so I had a whole bunch of material, and over the last several months, I've just composed and recorded a ton of this music.
Well, Brock, had you ever done anything like this before, working this way, starting with the drums and something that was this open?
Not this open, no. But a lot of recording where you're just laying tracks down like that for some. But that's for pop or whatever, and stuff can get chopped up. So in that sense, but not like this, and like what was really cool was after knowing, like what Frank had said, is after knowing what he was going to write, I could get very more specific in my style of improvisation. Like I wouldn't do the solos that I did that the record are if I was in a club or a concert playing a drum solo. They didn't more. So this allowed for like sharp changes, abrupt changes, and that might just be weird and off-putting, but the way he wrote, I said, well, no, this is actually food for the ideas.
Sure.
And because there's so much on top of it, it also kind of disguises the abruptness.
Did you imagine what Frank was going to do while you were playing, especially after you'd heard the first?
Well, I couldn't really imagine, but I could imagine that the more things that I threw at it, the more information the more options he would have. But then again, I think we were lucky. We did a lot. I think we were lucky. Maybe the next day I would have come here and not done stuff that struck him.
Brock really is like, he's my musical muse in a way, because what he brought to the project rhythmically and conceptually, because he studied a lot of Middle Eastern and African kind of music, it was just such an open rhythmic palette that it really opened me up to all kinds of melodic and harmonic ideas that normally I don't think I would have come up with.
Did you think about, when you were soloing, leaving space, or how you worked with open space in the solos, thinking about what was going to come later? Because as we know, Frank is not known as a minimalist composer.
Yeah, I mean, I figured that, like, well, for instance, I was listening to one, I don't remember, but there's a few things that where I played really just straight, like maybe half notes, just big, right? And really, well, you know, what that can be whatever. There be a million notes around it or just those strikes. Either way, it's drama. Right. Now, like, for instance, the piglet thing, this is the great thing, the piglet thing, and this is very easy to understand. Piglets on a trampoline, bouncing. Piglets are different weight, different shapes. Some are more active than others, so they're going to bounce at different rates. Some are going to plop off the side. That's going to be a different sound. So you just think about that, and there you go. Yeah. I mean, anybody could tap something that would make the sound of piglets bouncing. I think just about anybody could do that. Maybe I went a little further with it, but right? It's so easy.
Could you talk a little bit more about some of the influences that you brought to this, in your innate experience with percussion and different musical cultures?
Just everything. I mean, because
I know you brought some instruments with you tonight.
Yeah, I mean, these are all instruments that I pretty much schlep around everywhere and use in a way, and I use them. A lot of them are just stuff that I throw on the drum set.
What is this one here?
This is a pipanophone, and so this goes on to another cymbal. This is actually fits onto a cymbal, but you can hit it all over the place. You can hit it here. You can scrape it. And the springs like resonate, and it bounces on the flat ride cymbal, and it's really useful.
Now, is there a particular brand of pipe pan that you prefer?
This one's Miro, M-I-R-R-O.
Oh, I think that's a classic.
It's light. It's light. And I've got other pipe panophones, but this is the best one. This is a buffetophonium. And
nice.
This is self-explanatory, you know, and it's got two great surfaces, and it can be used all kinds of ways. And then these are just panderas.
And you put it outside in the hall at the end of the gig, right?
When you're done.
Room service picks it up.
So these are panderas.
Okay.
And
different sizes.
And I use them you know, I just throw them around.
Can I ask, what's the difference between a pandero and a tambourine?
Pandero is a Brazilian instrument. The jingles are different, and it's more played by hand. It's played. There's a whole different technique to it.
Yeah.
And I didn't do any of that, and I'm not good at that. This is a little baby tambourine. I sometimes use this to hit, and then another little thing and throw it around, you know, on stuff. A lot of this stuff, you know, like when you're switching between instruments, it's not only. Like if I started some of the pieces I started with these on, and then different sticks, and then all of a sudden halfway through it I'm not using these, and I've gone to so it changes the whole quality of the instrument I'm playing.
So while you're playing, are you like taking it off?
Or there's a pause, and then I didn't
even notice that you were doing that.
Or switch sticks.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now what's this one here?
This is actually just this is part of my magic show. I'm down Hollywood Boulevard. Anyhow, so this is just a Zildjian thing. These are great. I use this one just to hang and to play it. But you can actually stack them on other cymbals, or smaller ones can go on the snare drum. That's really cool. I think I actually might have done that on the Funk Machine one at one point. It's like a gated snare.
Did you cut this yourself, or do they come this way?
They come this way. Anybody can buy them.
Oh.
These ended up together after a pack. I pulled the thing open, and they got pressed together, and they have not come apart.
It's just stuck.
Yeah. But you like it that way? You like the sound?
I love it. I love it because it's an accident that was meant to happen.
Yeah.
It's magic.
Yeah.
So when we did this, I did like how many, 10 solos maybe?
Yeah.
3 or 4 minutes. I mean, I pretty much had to like change things to keep my own interest. If I would have just sat down a drum set, that would have been maybe good for half as much. So changing sticks, changing the whole timbre of the instrument, using different, that keeps the interest going. But there, and then putting myself, just drawing on influences like any other. I do a lot of Brazilian stuff, so there's a lot of that in me. There's a lot of punk rock. There's a lot of jazz.
Frank, you used a click track on these, not to get too geeky here, but there was a click track that was playing when Brock was soloing.
For me, to be able to compose, it's helpful. I didn't have to have a click track, but it made it a lot easier to line up a click track. And the first things we did, we used a very slow click, like around that tempo. And so Brock would just play over it. And what I found was it made it harder for me because at that slow click, I was dealing with 64th notes, 128th notes, incredibly deep polyrhythmic tuplets. Whereas at the second time, I was like, let's make it like an eighth note click. So here was like an eighth note. And then when he played it, it was still incredibly difficult, but I was looking at more like 30-second notes and 30-second note triplets as opposed to extremely small durations that I was having to mathematically figure out how I'm going to, try and hit this with all the instruments I used. I used a lot of samples and synthesizers and then played at some tracks 40 to 50 woodwind tracks from piccolos down to contrabass clarinets.
Frank, could you describe for somebody who's coming to this for the first time, what was the concept and how did you work with Brock? What happened first? What were the steps creatively, just in the broadest balcony view terms?
Okay. Brock came over with his drums. I set him up. I said, so let's do something, fast or medium. Let's do something with colors or whatever. And we came up with a click tempo. I'd play a click and he'd say, maybe a little faster, maybe a little slower. And he'd say, okay, that's good. And then I just put it in record and he'd play a solo. And then he left and I wrote some music. That was the Outer Spaces trilogy. Then after he heard those, he said, can we do some more? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And so he came over because from what I did, I think he got a better idea of what I was doing to accompany the drum solos. And so at that point, before he came over, because it was a couple of months actually after I got done with those three pieces, I came up with a bunch of different titles. As we mentioned, Piglets Bouncing on a Trampoline, It's Fake News, No It's Not, Drunken Bar Brawl was another one that, so I would say, okay, like Drunken Bar Brawl, I said, okay, Brock, so this is like, a bunch of people at a bar, they've gotten drunk, they're one guy saying one thing to another guy, they get into a fight, it starts being a free-for-all, you just go nuts. I guess I always associate blues with a bar, and so I use 3 different keyed blues scales, and I use clarinet section, a saxophone section, and a trombone section. With Alex Isles came over and played like 6 trombone parts on it, and so that was like the 3 factions, the 3 groups of people that were all getting into a fight together. So.
Yeah.
Well, and one that had a strong visual component too was the track that I played on.
Yeah.
So how did you explain that to Brock?
Well, that's a funny one because I said to Brock, yeah, psychedelic funk machine. And I said, so the idea is like this funk, like a drum machine or just a funk groove, but it's like the guys in the band have taken LSD or something. So it's going to go in and out of time, but there's going to be this funk groove, but it drifts from it. It goes into surreal kind of funk stuff. And so he played this great thing, and he did everything I could have possibly imagined that would be in there. And I basically took it, and the first thing I did with that was create a funk bass line to his kick drum, his bass drum, as he played the bass drum, which is kind of a lot of times on funk tunes, the kick drum and the bass player kind of play a pattern together or off each other.
So you keyed into the
and
kick
the first thing I did was I said, okay, this is going to be like a James Brown thing because that was kind of the groove he played. And so I just did a bass line thing to it. And then, from there, I created all the other elements, which are just very disparate funk licks and just weird little grooves. And then you came over and played some fantastic rhythm guitar and solo guitar things on top of that.
It's fun. Yeah.
So...
Okay, so next thing I wanted to ask you about was the track called Shimmering Vibrations.
Well, I told him, the idea of shimmering vibrations. I wanted something that was it was almost not that rhythmic. I think I said, just play your cymbals a lot and with different sticks and mallets and what I wanted to do is write voicings to these, to me, cymbals have all these overtones. And so I thought I could write voicings to these cymbal overtones that would be all kind of striking and different. It's it's polytonal. This one wasn't a tone row. It was based on kind of like 3 major 9 chords that were a major third apart, like G major 9, B major 9, and E flat major 9. So it was all flutes. So I had the bass flutes doing one key down in the lower register, and the middle register were alto flutes, and the upper register were C flutes and piccolos when it got kind of extremely high. And it's all based off overtone series and what I was hearing in the harmonics, or whatever you want to call it, in the overtone series in his cymbals. And that's basically it.
What was that like for you, Brock? Sounds like that was different.
That's one of my favorite pieces on here. I mean, it just stands out. I don't know, I set rules. I vaguely remember that I just put metal everywhere. And on the toms and everything. So I had as many cymbals and as many odd sticks. And so just tried to keep away from any other instrument. I think there's like one tom hit and barely a bass drum hit, which is actually really beautiful. But it was like that was, but I wasn't, I messed up.
No, it was
great
good.
mistake. but because my rules were just metal, and just not be think of crescendos and things like that. Just dynamics. And cymbals. Cymbals are beautiful. At the medium and even the lower dynamics, there's all kinds of strange things that happen.
Yeah.
Well, and the last one we wanted to talk about is it's fake news. No, it's not.
Yeah. Originally, the title was "Conversation with a Trump Supporter," and Brock. It was the last thing we did of the day of recording, and I was just. It was just as he played, I was just like, "Oh my God, this is perfect! I know exactly what to do with this." Just as he was playing it, and he did to me a brilliant thing of. It was just like 3 tom hits, just like doom, doom, doom. And then it'd be like an answer phrase to that over the drum kit. So it was like someone saying, like it's fake news, and then someone going, no, it's not, it's really something else. It's fake news. And then another phrase. And it got to a point where the answer phrase was just this frantic, like, So, but what was funny is it was still going to be called Conversation with a Trump Supporter. But when I started working on it, I had this ba-di-da for it's famous for the 3 tom hits. And I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of nice. And then Brock came over as I was working on it one day, and he was listening to it, and we were just talking about it. And I said, yeah, the ba-da-da is the non-Trump supporter going like, saying like da da da, asking a question, and the Trump supporters getting angry. And he said, well, that's funny. I thought it was the other way around. Yeah. And so I said, oh, really? He goes, yeah, I thought it was like the guy going like it's fake news or whatever. And then the other guy getting all upset about it. The
spirit's the same no matter what.
And that's what we realized is like either way you go, it's the same concept. Whoever is making the phrase and the other person's arguing.
But I have to ask you, what is the last chord? What is that all about?
The last chord is fun. So it was the way it ended. Brock just kind of ended it. And so with kind of the last hit, I used a combination of bass and contrabass clarinets in their very lowest octave, and it's just extremely low, just playing a low cluster down here at the bottom of the piano, and they just hold it for a really long time, kind of like the Beatles, A Day in the Life, when they hit the 4 pianos and let it ring. It doesn't go quite that long, but it's this incredibly dissonant, low, kind of ugly sound that was just supposed to give you just this feeling of dread and hopelessness.
I suppose.
And that's the record.
Frank, after the drums were recorded, how did you even start to approach composing to something like that? Did you, I wanted to ask you specifically, did you how far did you get into transcribing and notating the drums, and how much of it did you just sort of jump in and start writing music?
So, yeah, it's a great question, I think, because I kind of was daunted with it as well. I mean, I'd listened to it, and I'd listened to this piece of drum improvisation, and I'd listened to it several times in a row, just listening through it and just trying to. And then what I started doing is mapping out like section-wise, like, okay, he's starting off with this thing, and then he switches into this. That was a kind of break point to transition into something else. So I kind of marked sections up kind of like, okay, he's doing this and all. And I just write little notes to myself like, okay, here I'm just going to follow what he's playing. Then here in this part, he gets really fast. I'm going to just do hits and let the drums be exposed more. Then in this part, but there was a stream of consciousness kind of sense of composition that I've used a few times in the past. Sometimes I've done something like that on film music where it was a kind of a montage or something visually where it's like, oh, I can just go wherever I want with this. Mm-hmm. But this is so much more because in film, you're looking at images and you have to react emotionally to the images. This, I'm just listening to the sound of rhythm and the sound of your drums and everything and kind of going, okay, he's really hitting this fierce. So this has got to have a primal energy. This part, he's kind of like opened up and there's cymbals and it's more of an open, ambient kind of section so I can sustain things out here. And I just literally just wrote until I got tired, basically, and then I'd take a break. and walk away from it for, anywhere from a few minutes to a day and come back to it and go, okay, where did I leave off and where am I going? But I did kind of just spend a lot of time initially just listening to the pure piece, and I never messed with I never really was like, oh, I'm going to cut out these 4 bars here. It was like, this is what he played, this is what I have to write to. And so it was like a rule I made up for myself. And that was essentially how I approached them. Some of them, things fell into place a lot easier. Others were a lot harder to get a sense from beginning to end, but they all kind of worked out.
So it sounds like you used Brock's performances to create the form of the pieces rather than sitting down and saying, I'm going to write this, I'm going to make this ABA form or whatever.
Exactly.
You really listened to what he did and let that determine how the music appeared.
Right, absolutely. And part of that was, and that's where I got into what's called tone row writing, where you use, anybody, music geeks out there that are into 20th century music, Schoenberg and other wonderful composers created this new system of 12-tone music where you're using all 12 of the chromatic tones, and they created kind of almost your own rules where you have to go through the row before you can go back to the first note. You have to go through all 12, and then all those notes are used in voicings. I did that to some degree, but again, using his drums and his performance, when something happened, I would at times just go, forget the rules on the row right here. With what he's doing, I want this voicing. And I know that it's not precise to it, but hopefully after about 40 years of composing music, I have some sense of like where I think music should go, at least for me personally. And so I just would throw the rules out the window every so often.
What did you think the very first time you heard the first orchestration in its first draft that Frank did? Were you surprised, or were you?
I was blown away. I mean, I was pleased, and yeah, it's like, okay, wow. I mean, because it's kind of odd. I mean, it's just odd, right? You go, come and play, and then this person puts all this, I was just like, I can't believe you put all this work into it. And I mean, just listening to you had to listen to these solos. Now, I mean, rad, but that's hard. That would be hard.
It's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. I was blown away and impressed and just excited. Just the idea that somebody would take that form and then do that, and then the process has taught me a whole lot.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to point out that's very interesting, I don't know if we get to it, but when you listen to the music, there's quite often, I mean, you can listen to this music and not know the backstory of how it was created. Mm-hmm. It could have just been, sometimes you listen to it and you go like, okay, this is this crazy music and this drummer's playing to it. Because the way he wrote the music, it makes it sound like, oh, that's a great, there's some really great drum fills. Well,
right.
It's drum solo. So he exposes that part and this thing works, and it's all of a sudden like,
Well, I guess at the end of the day, that is what it is. You just listen to the music. I mean, we look at it from how it came into being as musicians, and there's a certain excitement in that. But to someone who just listens to this, it's just a powerful experience.
That's the greatest thing. That's the biggest. I think that's the greatest thing.
Yeah.
And this is great. It's a different art.
Yeah, and this is so original. I mean, this music is just is unique, and it's intense and it's beautiful, and it's very exciting. So I wanted to ask you about a couple of the pieces that we've been talking about a little bit. The first one is the title track, I guess you'd call it, the single, right?
Yeah.
This is going to be the top 40 track. It's called Rhythm Kaleidoscope. Could you explain a little bit about where that came from?
I've been thinking about for the whole album project, what should this be called? And I had all these things with rhythm, this and that, and kaleidoscope, the word came to me, and I looked up the definition, and a kaleidoscope is really just kind of like a stream of consciousness and just random colors and shapes moving at a constant, not constant, but at some flow. And I went, wow, rhythm kaleidoscope. I think that's it. And then I realized this piece, because what I did at one point in this one is Brock was doing this very complicated solo thing where I took each drum, the kick drum, the snare drum, the high tom, the low tom, and the cymbals, and I wrote for each one of those different melodic elements. So it's like 6-part counterpoint going on. And it was like, it's kind of like, call it hard listening as opposed to the easy listening bin that records sometimes go in. And, but it just really seemed like a kaleidoscope to me. And it works on this 12-tone principle. You'll hear at the beginning of it, bass clarinet just stating the 12-tone row. And then I just take it from there and go.
Well, the next one up is called Lightspeed. Is it? Have I got the name right?
Yeah. That one was one of the first 3 that we did before we had titles, and that ended up being used as 3 pieces, and I called them Outer Spaces. And originally, it was just the idea was like a 3-movement drum concerto kind of idea, and the 3rd movement was he played this really fast kind of stuff, and I was like, oh, it's like Lightspeed. Each movement had something to do with something with outer space, and so this one was Lightspeed, which is, I guess, pretty fast if you watch Star Trek. The form on that one was using a series of open fifths and major thirds. So, you'll hear at the end of the piece, at the final culmination, you hear this big pyramid from C, G, and then goes B, F sharp, B flat, F, A, E, and continues up in thirds and open fifths. And that became kind of the whole structure of voicing and melodic material.
When this project started out, Brock, it was an experiment for both of you. And as Frank said, he wasn't even sure if this concept was going to work. And then it became more and more of a collaboration. And now that it's all finished and now that the whole package is done, how does it feel to you?
It feels great. And it all makes all the pieces, to me, work together. There's a lot of shifts, and what am I listening to? If you just, you know what I mean? And it covers a lot of ground like that. I'm very, very happy with it. I feel indebted to Frank. I mean, it's just me jamming, I mean, really, I do that at home all the time. Nobody ever writes shit to it.
Well, how about you, Frank? How do you feel like it holds together as a project?
I feel that this is one of the better things I've done in my career of writing music. I think I've pushed myself. The thing I've always liked to do in music is to experiment. A lot of times those experiments don't work, but to me, it's the exploration of sound and ideas and rhythm and harmony and melody and just all of what music is, but trying to do it in a different way. And it doesn't always work. And there's probably parts of this that don't work and don't work for a certain amount of people. This isn't music that everybody is going to like, and I accept that. And I understand that in general with my music, that it's not always everybody's cup of tea. But having said that, I feel like that there's a lot, really tried to put a lot of color and a lot of imagination into these pieces. And Brock supplied me with so much to work from that I'm just in debt to you for the great creativity that you brought into this. And part of it, I'm also grateful to where technology is now, that I was able to sit here and create 50 woodwind parts that were on some of the stuff I had to practice for days because he plays so hard, and I'm like, oh, I want to play along with that. And so I had to just practice and practice. So it was kind of good for me. And some things it was just, really hard to get. But at the end of it, I feel like I put together something that hopefully will hold up over time, and the pieces to some degree hopefully complement each other, so it isn't just the same thing over and over in each piece. One of the pieces we did, Slinky, is just a friend of mine, Stephanie Fife, doing 8 cello parts and drums, and I played just for a minute a little tenor sax solo, but it's pretty much just cellos and drums, and he's playing brushes on it. And I think that really holds up, and it's very different than some of the other pieces. And, I really had a lot of fun with it. It really took my mind off a lot of things that are going on in the world these days so it was really kind of like mental health stuff for me too, to have this to work on.
One of the things, I don't know, you can listen to this, and there's also, there's Frank's composition. There's also Frank's soloing. So there's this character that's another good bit of the glue. I don't know if you might not think, but there's this glue there's this character, soloist, and the drum soloist character, and then the orchestration. There is this other element. It's kind of that goes through it, I think.
Yeah, and it appears and goes away.
It's an odd thing. It's sort of a glue that this.
Yeah, I like that.
But no, well, it is, because you're soloing, man.
So what's next? Are you guys going to take this on tour, or
I don't think this will ever be able to be performed live. We've talked about it, and I just don't see how.
We were going to do duets, and then
we might still do some of that. Record duets, and then I would add stuff to it. But I've come up with, in just in the last couple of weeks, some new titles and ideas that are different than these. So I might hit you up for some more.
Yeah. Anytime.
Well, thanks, you guys. It's a beautiful record. I loved having the opportunity to be part of it. Thanks for asking me, and thanks for talking tonight. It's great, and best of luck with this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.